So I think most people go about their decision to claim Social Security early versus delay it kind of all wrong. They just kind of think, how long do I need to live to where I come off better off by delaying? They'll look at break-even tables. And I think that's only really looking at one element of the decision, how long you expect to live. And that is an important element, don't get me wrong, but there is another element that really should be considered. And those are your investment returns, or the IRR of that decision to delay. We can actually look at the return streams of claiming early versus delaying and put an exact number on the returns you're getting from that decision based on how long you live. For the average person, the return hurdle that they need to get is around 6%, maybe 7% for females. Now, if you expect to earn more than that, then claiming Social Security early is often a good decision. If you expect a lower return than that, then delaying is often the optimal move. But I'm going to run you through the whole charts that show you that internal rate of return against your age and kind of break down that decision for you to hopefully give you a little bit more context to make a good decision around whether you should claim your Social Security early versus delay it. Now, my name is Scott Caufield. I'm a CPA and CFA charter holder and the founder of Sophos Wealth Management. So the first graph I want to show you, it compares taking Social Security at full retirement age, or 67, versus claiming it early at 62. Now, what you're going to see is that before 78, the return is negative. In fact, the first 5 years, the return is negative 100%, right? If you're going to delay to full retirement age, you're giving up 5 years of taking that Social Security early. If you were to pass away in those first 5 years, you would have obviously been much better off by having claimed early. You don't break even on that decision until you hit 78. And then it starts to become more and more attractive over time. If you get into your mid to late 90s, the return is over 6%. And when I'm talking about these returns, keep in mind, this is a real return. So not only do you get 6%, you get 6% plus inflation. If inflation historically has been about 3%, that would equate to a 9% return if you live into your 90s. Now you're going to see on this chart, I've plotted a blue line for men and a pink line for women. That is based on actuarial life expectancies. How long is the average man expected to live? It's about 81.6. So that is telling you a 62-year-old man is expected to live just under 20 years from 62. A 62-year-old woman, just over 22, or just at 22 and a half years. So the internal rate of return for a man who's 62 that lives to 81.6 is about 2.9%. The real return that average man would need to earn to make claiming early attractive would be 2.9% plus inflation. So if I assume inflation is 3%, he needs to earn at least 6% to make claiming early for the average man a good decision. For the average woman, if 4.2% is the hurdle and we've got 3% inflation, it's about a 7% return hurdle. I really like this kind of chart way of thinking about it. What sort of longevity does your family have? How's your personal health condition? Do you expect to be living into the 90s? Again, that 6% real return is pretty darn attractive. Maybe your parents or grandparents did not have really long lifespans. Maybe you've got some pre-existing health conditions. Maybe it's more like 70s to 80 for you. Then the return hurdle is pretty low or even negative, and claiming early might be the optimal strategy. Now, let's kind of break this down further. If we look at 62 versus 70, right? Claiming early versus delaying as long as possible, it just kind of shifts things a little bit. So as you can see, we're not going to break even now until more like 80. We're not getting into those more attractive, say 4% plus internal rate of return until our mid 80s, 86, 87. That's when we go over that 4% real return. We get into the 7% or so nominal returns would be expected. And then the last one to think about is, well, do I take it at full retirement age, 67, or do I delay as late as possible? And, the numbers do change around a little bit here. So with the life expectancies, I have adjusted it for a 67-year-old. So that moves it to an 83.1 life expectancy for men, 85.6 life expectancy for women. And what you see is the male hurdle is way down at a real return of 1.4%. So kind of interesting there that taking it at 67 might be more attractive for a lot than waiting all the way till 70, at least on an average basis. And then for women, it's that 3% IRR. So that kind of equates more to the 6% nominal return. Here's a table that really kind of breaks down the specific numbers by age. So you can see ages where they're getting close to positive, ages 78 all the way to 100. We've got 62 versus 67, 62 versus 70, and then 67 versus 70. So you can kind of think through all the decisions there. On the right side, I've kind of shown you the percentage survival odds for a 62-year-old male. Again, this is coming from actuarial tables. So you can see kind of on average, it's right before 82 would be that 50-50 odds. The odds of living to 90, less than 20%. Now, the joint survival odds is for like a married couple. And this is an important distinction here because, what might be optimal for one person on Social Security might not be the same strategy for a couple, especially when you've got one person in the couple who is a higher earner. In that case, delaying becomes more attractive than, say, the average because the joint survival odds are so different. So while the 62-year-old male on average might only live to 81, 82, the 62-year-old male-female couple on average will have at least one person live till 88, 89. That's going to bring in the real rate of return between 4, 5, 5.5, kind of depending. And, that is far more attractive than, it is for that 50-50 lone male where it was only, guesstimated around 2.9%. It's a different decision factor for married couples versus individuals. I just want to make it clear, this only applies if you are retired. If you are before full retirement age and still working, claiming Social Security is usually not going to be a good idea because you're not going to get the full benefit. It's going to be reduced for those dollars you're making. So this is really only going to apply if you're retiring before full retirement age. Last thing I want to point out is just give you some context around investment returns to kind of benchmark. Now, most people would look at this Social Security return as a guaranteed rate of return. Based on the existing law, you're guaranteed to get exactly that internal rate of return as long as you live to those various ages. The only problem with that is laws can change, rules can change. Social Security benefits might not be the same 20 years from now as they are today. Maybe they change the COLA formula for how inflation is adjusted. Maybe they do some means testing. Right now, Social Security is projected to go bankrupt in 2032. That would mean a roughly 24% across the board cut to Social Security benefits if no changes were made to the law. What are the likelihoods of a 20%, 24% across the board cut? I would say super, super low. All politicians would be voted out of office. However, if you're high net worth, high income type person, you might want to discount your future Social Security benefits, and that might lead you to weigh more heavily taking those benefits early. If your adjusted gross income is under like 100,000, your investment portfolio is under 1 to 2 million, probably not at nearly as much risk as those who are in the much higher income brackets. If we benchmark some of those returns against other investment returns, the closest thing to a guaranteed return would be Treasury inflation protected securities. That's probably the closest thing to the stream of income you can get from Social Security. So these are Treasury securities that will be inflation adjusted. If you were to buy a 20-year TIPS bond, that inflation protected security, it would give you about a 2.3% return. Now, if we go back to comparing the 67-year-old versus 62-year-old, if a man lived 20 years to about 82, he would be earning a return of about 3.1%. So on average, do a little bit better than the TIPS bond would on that 20-year time horizon. Now, if they live longer than that 20-year time horizon, obviously the Social Security guarantee gets more and more attractive. Live less long, then the guaranteed TIPS would be more attractive. On the flip side, if you were to just do investment returns, looking at historical returns, you'd expect around 10% for stocks. You'd expect around 4.8% for U.S. Treasury bonds or Treasury notes, and just under 7% for corporate bonds. That's just based on data from Robert Shiller, 1928 to 2024. Inflation historically just over 3% on that same time horizon. So, some food for thought to hopefully kind of guide your decision. Again, I don't think it's always just so simple as what's the break-even point. You want to take into account both the return you're getting and your longevity. So hope this gives you some data to kind of help you with your decision. Feel free to go back, pause the video, look at that table, kind of break down the right return for you, or what you think you kind of want to benchmark, so that you're making a smart decision for your situation. Hope you like this video. Subscribe to my channel and share with anyone you think would benefit. Thanks.